Good morning. Today we look at Genesis 16 and 17. I briefly talked a little bit about 16 yesterday. I hadn't looked. I'd read the text earlier, but I don't know, for whatever reason, when I came out here and added one more chapter. But in chapter 16, we find Abram about 85 years old, and they have no children. And his wife, knows the promise, and she says, we've got no children. I'm getting really old, and it's one of those things that, we read not so long ago about people really living 700, 800, 900 years, and then all of a sudden, boom, the age was, or the length of life was dropped down to around 100 or maybe 120, and in the Psalms we'll read 70 or 80, but the reality was that, to begin with, people did live much longer because of the way God had everything set out and working and that. But now when Abram is 85 and Sarah is 75, 76, it's looking pretty impossible to have any kids. And she has this young servant girl, Hagar, and she gives this slave girl, an Egyptian slave girl, to Abram to have a child with, and this child does. She conceives, it says, and then she looked with contempt upon her mistress. Hagar, for whatever reason, since she could have a child and Sarai couldn't, it was, that look of, I'm superior to you, I'm better than you, you are worth nothing, or whatever. You have failed your husband, and look at me, and whether that was true or whether that was just what, I guess it says here, she looked with contempt upon her mistress, but that was very hurtful to Sarai. And, she says, may the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave girl, and she looked at me with contempt, but may the Lord judge between you and me. And, she's understanding that what she did was wrong. But Abram said to her, your slave girl is in your power. Do to her as you would wish. And so the punishment, Sarai kicks her out, sends her on her way, dealt harshly with her, it says, and then she ran away. And she and her child were out by the wilderness, and an angel of the Lord found her there. And, it was, well, the child wasn't born yet then, but she was running away, and the angel comes and says, you have conceived, and you will bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has seen your affliction. And so, even though this was wrong, that happened, that, Sarai took things into her own hands to try to make God's will happen, that Abram would have a child, God still finds a way to work with this. And rather than this young servant girl from Egypt, Hagar, just going off, nobody knowing what happens to her. We know what happened to her because of God, and what he says about Ishmael, he'll be a wild ass of a man, my Bible says, and his hand will be against everyone, and he will live at odds with his kin. There will be, enmity. There will be grief, between the younger brother and we, so Hagar bears this son, and Abram named his son Ishmael. So Abram was 86 when Hagar had Ishmael. And as we read on then into chapter 17, it's 13 years later, because here we are now, Abram is 99. And the Lord appears to him again, and he said, walk with me. God says to Abram, walk with me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant with you. And He says, you will be the ancestor of a multitude of nations, but you shall no longer be Abram, but Abraham. For I have made you the ancestor of many nations. And so Abram becomes Abraham. And in this same vein, now then, in verse 15, God says, as for Sarai, your wife, she shall not be Sarai, but Sarah will be her name. And I will bless her, and I will give you a son by her. So Abram is 99, and Sarah is, or Abraham now, I got to start switching the name, is, 90 years old. And so by the time that this son of theirs is born, the Ishmael will be, in his early teens, because it was, 14 years between, or 13 years between Ishmael's birth and Sarah becoming pregnant with her child. But in the middle of that, I kind of just went over starting in verse 9, Abram said, as for you, you will keep my covenant. And the covenant that is to be kept then is that all male offspring will be circumcised. Between you and me, your offspring will be circumcised. Every male among you will be circumcised. And I think about that now. In today's world, it's, it's coming under question whether this is a good thing or a necessary thing. And from what I have read, there are, it's not uncommon for people not to be circumcised now or to have their male children circumcised. But Abraham was to do it when the child was 8 days old. So it would be done at a very early age when it wasn't quite maybe as painful and as whatever, but so it was a promise that Abraham and all of his descendants would do this to honor the covenant with God, to be God's people. And he says, throughout your generations, every male among you shall be circumcised when he is 8 days old. And when Jesus was 8 days old, his parents, Joseph and Mary, brought him to the temple, for the naming and for all of that as well. And, and so it continued. And it continues yet today that, especially for the Jewish people, this is a continuing promise. And it says, verse 14, any uncircumcised male will be put off from his people because he has broken my covenant. And then again, yet, we look at this covenant with Abraham, that God had, and then the covenant he ends up with Moses, with the 10 Commandments, and then God saying through the prophet Jeremiah, I will create a new covenant with you, and Jesus' words, this is the new covenant in my blood. So God continues to make covenants with his people, promises to them of his love and of his grace. But anyway, after that then, Sarai is renamed Sarah. She's 90 years old. That's his question. Could Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And then Abraham says to God, oh, that Ishmael might live in your sight. Can you accept Ishmael? God, he says to God. And Ishmael is not the one that your descendants are going to come from. They're going to be so that I'm going to that will find favor with me. But I will establish a covenant with him as well. He says, I have heard you. I will bless him. I will make him fruitful, exceedingly numerous, and he will be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will be established with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you this season, at this season of next year. And so Ishmael, this firstborn son, is not going to be the heir. This is what it should be. The firstborn son would be the heir, the one of the promise. But his Abraham and Sarah's son, Isaac, would be the one of the promise. And then in verse 23, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all the slaves born in his house, even every male among the men of God's house, and circumcised them all. Abraham himself was 99 years old when he was circumcised. And this is, to establish or to reinforce, to accept the covenant that God made with him. And it's just so God continues to work with his people, making his promises to them, to us. And we know then, just within this, the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac, there's this animosity that continues yet today between those two nations that come from Abraham.